Welcome, everybody. This is a brand new unit, the CHCADV001. Let me just adjust my screen for us, and we'll get started. So this unit is about the advocacy, so facilitate the interests and the rights of our clients. I'll walk you through the slides, which you will have a copy of, and then I'll briefly go over the assessments that you need. You'll also have the opportunity, if you're an enrolled learner, to be able to attend live classes, which will run weekly, and your assessments for this will be around both the written and your skills side of it. So I'll just walk you through this. Starting, we'll do our acknowledgement to country, and Haida Institute of Education would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we work, study and live, and pay our respect to elders past, present and future. We celebrate the stories, culture and tradition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders of all communities who also work and live on this land. I'd just like to welcome you if you're watching this recording. The housekeeping for this is this can be around some sensitive issues for some of our clients when we're working with them. So just make sure that you take those breaks. 20-minute bites is great to do some studying. You'll get your learning from this recording, your learner's guide for CHCADV001 from your class discussions, which don't get recorded. This will be your only recording for this unit. But you will get the slides and you can go through those. I'll go through the slides as well with this recording and just unpack some of the meaning behind the key learnings that you need to have around this unit. So advocacy, by the end of this session, you'll have a better understanding around what the rights are, human rights and the needs of a client depending on their diversity. And then also what is an advocate? What's the difference between an advocate and a support worker? So in Australia, we recognise the rights around the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and we have legislation to look after people's rights. So a right is something that you're entitled to in Australia, living in this country, supported by law or moral principle, value or belief, and the right to make your own choices and decisions if you have capacity. So rights in society, we have basic human rights, regardless of your cultural background, age, gender, preferences, income status or religion. The legal rights in Australia, we have our Commonwealth, which are our national laws and legislations. And then each state and territory may have their own laws as well as inside. And then you have your common law principles, which are the understanding or in the public interest. There's some great recordings for you to be able to watch in your own time as well. So human rights in Australia, we work under the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations, which Australia is a signatory to. And the Government of Australia agreed to uphold those rights in their declaration. So we encourage you while you're going through your learner's guide is to visit the website, the Human Rights Commission, some of the other rights around Fair Work Australia, have a look at the different legislations as well in your state or the territory where you live. And that's important because you need to know what rights and responsibilities sit around the work you do with your clients. So we have an international agreement on rights. We have treaties. We raise this because you're going to need this as some of your assessment work. So the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, Economic, Social and Cultural, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and there are agreements we have reached as a country, and the Convention on the Political Rights of Women. They are the international agreement rights that Australia is signatory to. Therefore, we place those rights around our common law as well, and then we have our legislated, our statutes. So reflect on, at this point, on what it is and why it's important to understand someone's rights, and then the effective use of advocacy and what your responsibilities are there, or how do we coach our clients to advocate on their own behalf. So rights and needs are around safety, personal safety and security, accessing services and having those rights, protection and legal remedies, and then the autonomy and freedom to make those choices. An advocate is someone who speaks on behalf of the first party. So you represent a person, a place, thing, or a cause. You're speaking for the client, following their directions. So you've got an agreement, and it needs to be a consent agreement, something that's been signed. You are making sure that you're instilling on behalf of the client the principles that sit around empowerment, and then remaining impartial in that space, supporting the client. You don't have to agree with what the client is wanting you to be an advocate for on their behalf, as long as you're not asked to do anything and you don't participate in anything unlawful. So what does an advocate do? And there's many roles. So we raise awareness, take action, and we gather information to be able to advocate on behalf of a client, a cause, or a thing. We need to be mindful that there is no power imbalance, that we are always representing the client in that space. So a service provider processes that we have, and we must work within the scope of our role versus what the client's need is. And then no personal significance to the provider, client significantly impacted, meaning that we need to make decisions sometimes if it's life or death. Dependence on services or codependency on a service, and how it may impact or affect the quality of somebody's life. It's all governed under the human rights, which Australia will go over to that website. I encourage you to do that and then do some research of your own. So in one of your case studies in your learner's guide in section 1.4, fear of child protection services, that case study there takes you in your learner's guide around why does Sandra feel lost and intimidated. It's quite a fearful space when agencies come in. You can walk beside a client and support them in asking questions. If they don't feel comfortable or they feel that they don't have that power when they're speaking to agencies, they may require you as a worker to be the advocate on their behalf, or you could refer them to an advocacy service. So children, you have a child advocate, you have an adult guardian, adult advocate, and you also now have an aged advocates and disability advocates as well, especially since 2009 when NDIS came in. So the types of advocacy bring about change on behalf of a client or a situation, an individual or a group, a system that might need changing, or a policy that needs to be reviewed. Self-advocacy is where a clients are supposed to speak and act on their own behalf. However, they may want you to just be there and support them, but we don't have our own views in that space. So the types of advocacy that we started to introduce came in the 1970s and the 1980s is when some legislation did change. So we broke that down into individual, group systems, advocacy around that, citizens, and then parents. So a lot of parents are carers, and then some young people are the carers to their parents. So sometimes a younger person might have someone aged where they become that carer. So you can act on behalf as an advocate, or you might be working with a client who is an advocate on behalf of somebody else. So the role of an advocate in the community service sector and the studies that you're doing is that clients are vulnerable and need someone to be able to act on their behalf. Identify what the sources of unfairness or an imbalance is there and supporting clients. And then having rights overlooked or violated. They are the aspects that sit around why an advocate may come into that space. So for example, we talk about child safety. It might be that you've got a client and a family who are looking for reunification, but they're struggling with the connection with the plan on transitioning, what that might be like. So they may feel that the person that needs to have those discussions requires another person there. So if you're a support person, you are not acting on behalf of the client, you're there simply to support. But if you're an advocate, then you can speak on behalf as long as you've got formal consent to do so. Sometimes you can have somebody give consent while they're still there, and just say, are you comfortable if I speak on your behalf, what it is that we've prepared for? And then they will acknowledge and give that in that time. You cannot coerce somebody into giving you that position in any of these discussions, and we cannot act independently without our client's consent. So just in reflecting on that, think about the difference between what an advocate does and what a support worker does. An advocate is a formal position. So you may be a court support advocate, you might be a disability advocate, you might be an NDIS advocate, and various roles. But a support worker has a different relationship where it's around your position description, your duties, and the scope of your role. But around advocacy, this unit is unpacking what areas of law you're protected under, the legislation, have an understanding of that on behalf of your clients as well. So we need to have a look at all of the legislations that impact your client in your state or territory. You don't have to know these off by heart, but you do need to be able to know who to refer your clients to or to get that information on behalf of your client, and then also where to go and have a look to get that information as well. Ensuring that it is non-discriminatory, that privacy and confidentiality is still a requirement. Even the information or the written consent. So you cannot share any information about a client without their consent anyway. And being their advocate, absolutely, you still cannot. That does not give you the legal right to be able to talk on their behalf without that person knowing. There are different levels of legal rights where you might have a power of attorney, and we'll cover that a little bit further along. So what we hear, what we say, and what we write and keep on record, and the privacy and confidentiality around that. If there's a matter before the courts, then the file notes can be subpoenaed, and so can you as a worker be subpoenaed to speak to anything that you may have made a statement around. So you need informed consent. So you've got to explain as an advocate, this is what you will do. And this is also what you cannot do for them. That's important to say both. And then the legal consent, which means you will have that formally signed. Rights and responsibilities, you have both, and your client has both. And then what is mandatory reporting in that space? being an advocate and saying that you're going to keep everything private and confidential, you have a duty of care around safety. So risk to self or others, that requires our mandatory reporting. So the relevant laws advocating for clients are under human and civil rights law, service provision regulations, and common law. So this unit, CHCADV001, and there's some higher ones as well, but this is an excellent one to be able to add to something like mental health first aid and being a JP, for instance, would be enough to strengthen your official role as an advocate for someone, but you don't need that. You could have this unit as you're doing with your studies, and this will explain to you what advocacy is like. So this is an informal advocacy role. You've still overarched by your policies, procedures, and the values, the scope of the role, and the service agreement that you have with your employer. But an independent advocate requires higher levels. So usually it's an officer of the court, and JP will put you in that space. And then there's some other advocacy studies. So you need to make sure that you are acting on behalf of the client for as long as the client chooses to. And then also you're still governed by the privacy and confidentiality around that. Keeping in mind, we just cannot speak on behalf of our client unless we have been instructed directly by the client to do so. You'll do your research around that. What's guardianship and power of attorney? What are the legal options? Person appointed to represent another person's interest is their guardian, and then limited and plenary. So a guardian to a young person may be a department, but it might also be a kinship placement where someone is now the legal guardian to that person and they've completed that process. The power of attorney is to make a decision on someone's behalf, but refer to your relevant state or territory. So you can have power of attorney, or a client might have power of attorney, and you can guide them that way for a period of time. Someone might be traveling overseas and they give you power of attorney to act on their behalf and speak to the bank and pay bills and make withdrawals or have phone conversations. So even if you've got another person on your phone account, you would need to give them authority. Authority is different to advocacy, and it's different to power of attorney. Power of attorney is a legal agreement and someone of sound mind to be able to make that commitment. So refer to your state or territory. What does power of attorney mean where you live? It's only granted when the person has the capacity to make decisions. So otherwise, that would be an advanced medical order. And that requires other people as well. But a power of attorney means, and sometimes people who are incarcerated may hand over power of attorney for decisions just to get things signed, like kids that might be at school, that they would hand that over. So it gives that person some legal security around that decision-making process on behalf of somebody else. Power of attorney happens also people who travel overseas, or people who might be unavailable, people who do FIFO or work away, they often will hand over power of attorney because time zones and being able to get back quickly, there could be a hardship. So you'll make an agreement, get affairs in order in that way. It doesn't always have to be life or death, but it does need to be a legal agreement. So what are the aspects? You will be legally responsible if you have power of attorney, the best interests of a child if it's a kinship placement, and then parents bear the primary responsibility around making decisions. So it could be that Centrelink deem that someone will receive those payments for family tax benefit A or B, but to do that would have to have that guardian in place of a parent. That all needs to be documented as well. You may be involved as a community sector worker to help them get that power of attorney, go and see a JP, be able to work with the representatives and be able to be listed as a person that is either power of attorney or guardianship in that space. I want you to watch those recordings in your own time, but that talks about duty of care and dignity of risk. The dignity of risk phrase is around the client absolutely has the right to make those decisions, even if it's a decision that we may not personally support, but if it is in the scope of the role and you're not being asked to do anything unlawful, then all we can do is put options in front of our clients and then assist them in making informed decisions, giving them the resources around them to be able to do that, and the dignity of risk to be able to say, look, I hear you, but I'm not going. When might that come up? It might be where someone hands over that guardianship to their children because they're going away to rehab or something for 6 months, and they need to make sure that their responsibilities are taken care of. But the duty of care that we have in that space is to make sure that we are not negligent, that we don't fail to take proper care in that process, and it can result in legal action against an advocate as well if we are not making sure that we follow those guidelines. So duty of care is where our actions may affect others, and that we do not cause reasonably foreseeable harm. Sometimes when we talk about duty of care in this space, we talk about, well, don't we have a duty of care over the client if they're going to be doing something that they could harm themselves? Well, this is where we need to make sure we have a good understanding around dignity of risk. So you'll have watched that video, and that will explain to you which bits are inside our guidelines and within the scope of our role, which bits are our responsibility and which are solely for our clients to make. We can explore those. We can look at what potential risk might be. Our duty of care would be to put those risks in front of them, but to absolutely make sure that the client is making the decisions on their own behalf. We cannot have a failure to take proper care without giving them that information as an advocate. You must document everything. And it's always good to have another person around you when you're speaking with the client. So dignity of risk is where your client weighs up the risks and benefits, not us. We don't give advice. Part of our duty of care to make sure all the information is there for considered decisions, not limiting our clients' freedom and their rights to decide these things on their own behalf, and clients in any community service sector. So that could be youth, alcohol and other drugs, mental health, community services, early childhood, individual support, aged care. Look, really any area in the community services sector. This is the value space and our sector standards that we must work to. And discrimination, there are anti-discrimination laws in Australia. Make sure that you go there. Now that's Commonwealth, that's legislated, and that's the protection as well. So people have the right. So we cannot single someone out and treat them differently. And discrimination can be also, we cannot favour somebody as well as deny somebody something. We need to have a look at both aspects. It's discrimination if somebody else is favoured over another person, or if someone is denied access, equity, and inclusivity as others might be. Laws exist based on the type of discrimination, so that's for courts to decide. So a legal person would interpret that, and you would refer your clients over. You would refer them over to Human Rights Commissioner. You can make inquiries, lodge complaints. They have authority to refer something over to criminal courts, and they also have the power and authority to impose fines and breaches on somebody, employers or another party. Discrimination can be around race, ethnicity, religion, age, gender, access, equity, all abilities, language. Yeah, there's so many different ways to discriminate. And some people may view that as an opinion, but it is actually law. And as a worker, you need to be aware of and always mindful of that. So there's a podcast there for you to listen, and it's worth going over that as well. But under the Discrimination Act around complaints, there are different avenues for making a complaint, and refer to the legislation that covers that type of discrimination. Part of this is your research, and you will find that on the Australian Human Rights Commission page. So this Australian Human Rights Commission is also where you go in and you can do your, get access to the NDIS worker orientation modules. So they're free to do, takes about 1.5 hours, and there's 3 separate modules. And I encourage you to do that. In the sector, most staff have to refresh and do that twice a year to be current in that space. I encourage you to go there as part of your studies, and once you've completed that, they will email you the certificate, and that's great to have in your resume as well. It may be a requirement when you start a role, but it's also something that you can say, oh, I've just recently done that. So there's a case study for you to be able to go over and in your learner's guide, have a look at Stella and explain also how the video made you think about your own attitude towards people with a disability. But it doesn't have to be that case study. You can wait till you get into your assessments. You can have a look at those on the Human Rights Commission, and it asks you some questions about which way you would go, what you would do, and how you may respond. That's a great one to practice too while you're in this study mode. So informed consent is to make sure that you don't rush that privacy, confidentiality intake process with our clients, and that we make sure that we let them know that anything they say, well, it is private and confidential. The time you would need to report anything would be if there was a safety matter around that. And do they have any questions to ask you about that? And then you need to get a yes or a no to continue working with your client. That is what informed consent is. So it's not something that we just say to get through that. I just want to let you know everything is private and confidential, your records, how we manage that. I cannot, by law, share any of your information with anybody else, and we secure your file notes. So that's not open for every staff member to be able to have access to or read either, and we have security around all of our digital as well. And then we might just say, do you understand if you've got any questions around that? And we sit in that space. If they go, no, I'm good to go, if they go, well, who are you going to tell? Then we have a responsibility to advise them who and what we might say and when we would say that. But in this space, I always like to let our clients know, but I would be telling you that this would be the time where I would have to share that information. And most times, I'll have the client with me when I do that. That isn't something that I just go and do without the client knowing. I always make sure that I've told them, because I'm still that worker and I'm still there supporting them, if it is safe for me to continue to do so. And we have a responsibility to our peers in the workplace as well. So consent is acting on choices and decisions. Legal consent, it requires us that they have the capacity to understand what they just agreed to, that the client must be over 18 years of age, otherwise that falls inside mandatory reporting. And then consent needs to be voluntary, no coercion, no threats, and no assumptions that just because we are the worker and they are the client, there can be no imbalance of power there. It is always about your client's right and your responsibility to respect that. So we have service agreements and contracts. We must work within those guidelines. There's statements and charters of clients' rights, their responsibilities, as well as their rights. So even in a program, if we're doing something, we'll often make an agreement, a soft contract, and we'll say, look, when we're together in this program, the things that work really well for me and the things that are no-go. Get your clients, if you're in a program, what do you need to feel that you will get the most out of the time that we spend together? It's okay to make soft contracts there. When we're working with our clients, the same. So we just say, what do you hope to get most out of the time that we spend together? If they come up with something that's outside of what your organisation does, well, then you get their consent to be able to refer them to another agency and you talk to them about that. You say, this is what I do here. When you're doing your role plays with your studies with us, we give you a simulated workplace environment. And you go on to a site, you have your policies, your procedures, all your working documents, your templates, and it gives you a hypothetical organisation, which is great. And you'll draw on those a lot in your written work. But if your service agreement and contract says that this is clearly what you can do or what you cannot do, we must tell our clients that that would be outside of what we do and as a service provider. But we would help them and advocate for them to be able to get that service if that is with a different provider or with a government department or an agency. So the legal principles are to follow due process. That means that you'll go through your intake and assessment correctly. You will take care of their written and their information they share with you. You'll keep that safe and secure. That you'll be transparent in all of your dealings. That nothing about me without me is the principle that you apply here. And then you'll be held accountable and you can speak to that. And you use your documentation to support those claims based on it. Oftentimes you will be there where you're doing all of your reports in and sharing that on behalf of a client who may need to have that representation with an advocate. And then with the agency, they might go, well, I think we'll pick this up and take it further. We have ombudsmen as well. So there's lots of different layers around that, and then legal requirements as well to meet. Mandatory reporting. Certain professionals are in each state or territory, so you'll need to look that up. It's going to be one of your questions as well. But GPs are mandatory reporters, children's services, child safety, police, doctors in hospitals, nurses, teachers' aides, anyone who works in the community service sector that is a tier 1, AMBOs, fireys, but any member of the public can report if they believe that this needs to be raised with the authorities. So, but there's certain professionals as tier ones who are mandatory reporters, and they must report abuse to government authorities. They're reporting it. It is up to that authority to investigate. So there may be no case, and that's good, but it is very stressful to make those reports, and it's very stressful for someone to be reported, especially when the authorities are not sensitive around that. So your role might be that you're advocating for someone who has been reported, and you support them, and they will ask those questions. So your role as a community support worker, though, is to make sure that they've got informed decisions, then taking actions, you're putting in a support plan, and you're walking beside them while they're putting that in place so that the authorities can view that favourably on behalf of your client. There's supports around minimising abuse cases of vulnerable people. If someone is being neglected and yet you know that that is the service that's meant to be provided, then you are required to report. And it applies in the same way in any aspect of a work role. So, but there are some absolute definite professionals, and that will be part of your research that you do for this one. So look up your state or territory, and if you're in classes, then you'll discuss that. But otherwise, if you're self-paced and you can't make it to class because you've got competing priorities, or you're just juggling and you can only be in class for some of them, this recording will cover the full unit for you. You've got these slides, you'll have this learner's guide, and your learner support officers can assist you in navigating that. So if you're new and this is your very first unit, then make sure that you've been in touch with your learner support officers. And I guess in a way, HADA work exactly the same as we do in the community sector. We have certain things are inside the scope of our role. So your trainers and assessors will talk about anything that's to do with your assessments, your knowledge, so your written assessment, and your skills, your role plays. And our learner support officers, within the scope of their role, they have everything to do with sending out your information, making sure things are in your porthole, helping you navigate your porthole, helping you with some basic questions. You go to your learner support officers first, and if there's something that they think a trainer needs to assist with, they will ask that, or you ask that in classes. But of course, if you can't make it to class, then they will refer that to a trainer, and we will feed that information back up to the learner support officers to be able to assist you with that. So in this part of it, it talks about the ethical issues and considerations. So this is a space where you can have a dilemma. You may know on one hand that legally this must happen, but ethically you may have an understanding of how that all played out. But at all times, the overarching is always the legislation. So you must comply by that as a worker. It's your responsibility to your employer, but it's also your responsibility once you've got this certificate or this diploma that you're doing this unit for, then you are saying, I have that qualification, therefore I know and I understand and I made that decision or I took that action and I was trained. So if you make the correct action, then you follow protocol. But if you work outside of the guidelines, then that may put you in a position where you're talking about the scope of your role or your agreement that you've got with your employer, that you have duty of care, that you can report on an organisation or on behalf of a client, and you will be protected under the whistleblower policy. So Human Rights Commission, we'll talk to you about that. But in our simulated environment, where you go into your simulated organisation, there is a whistleblower policy there. So read those and have an understanding. You do have protections in that space, but you cannot intentionally go outside of that, and you cannot neglect somebody else, because you're making decisions individually rather than around what you are required by law to do. So the dignity of risk and duty of care is usually where that happens. So you might be dealing with someone who uses and abuses substances, and that they're likely to be picked up by the law, or you might have a client that is the offender in a domestic family violence situation. So we don't always work with survivors. We will often work with people who are offenders as well, but I need to remind you, if it's not something that's in the front of your mind already, is that oftentimes it is from victim to offender as well. So client needs versus the organisation's requirements. So it's like, I hear what you're saying, however, this is where my limitations are. So those healthy professional boundaries. So no matter what, we don't cross that line. It's for your own protection as well. Make that your usual practice. Child protection, it's always mandatory. There's no dilemma there. And then, of course, principles of empowerment, making sure that the client has the right to make those decisions that impact their lives. It's just something for classes. Take a break, do a stretch when we come across these slides in our recording. Use that time to reflect. I like for starting with task 1 and then move on to task 2 and 3 and 4. The reason I say do it in that order is because task 1 gives you some key learnings and begins that foundation knowledge. Then 2 builds upon that and the learning sticks. And then task 3 or task 4, they also build upon that. So if you start at the end and it requires skills without the knowledge, that becomes fairly evident. So always start your assessments in that order if you can, if it's at all possible. Some of your role plays, your skills, you will do on your own behalf. With peers, it'll give you that in instructions, family, colleagues. There's a lot of resources around how to do your role plays and guides. So go to Discord or ask your learner support officers for the full suite of resources. You'll find those really helpful. Make sure that when you're going to do role plays that you've gone through those resources first. Otherwise, the role play might come back and say it's a great start, but you'll need to do it again. It's worth going into those resources. There's even a couple there on do's and don'ts, or what happens if I get something sent back? Do I have to do it all again? There's some great resources there for you. Okay, so we did spend time talking about the ethics around it, so the law and ethics, and then your own personal values, your own values base. So be aware of your beliefs and your personal ethics and how these affect your work. That we cannot come in with a bias, that would be discrimination, and that would be unlawful. So we can have opinions, but in the sector, we aren't emotionally attached to any of those. We step into that space, we turn up for our clients, and we're fully present as a sector worker. There's another case study for you to be able to go through in your learner's guide. Do that in your own time. You don't have to, but this gives you some underpinning knowledge. So professional ethics are guidelines for good and ethical practice. The Australian Community Workers Code of Ethics, look that up. And the Australian Community Work Practice Guidelines, also look that up. If you can't find resources, make sure that you go to learner support officers. They'll help you navigate that space and assist you. So you can do an activity around investigating community service workplace or an organisation. It might be clients might have a disability, and then just do some research around that. So pick an organisation, just out of your own curiosity. If you think you're going to be working with children's services, or work cover, or Fair Work Australia if you're working in the employment sector, just do a bit of research as well around what are their values and code of conduct. Even if you work collaboratively with legal aid, I do outside of HADA a lot, they have their own code of conduct and their values. Every organisation you go to work in, they will also have the same. But what's our own, and reflect on that. How is that going to impact how we work with clients? So the key around ethical principles, so just there, and this is the scope around that. These are the standards for a community sector worker. Dignity of risk versus duty of care. Make sure that you've reviewed the policies and procedures around this. Duty of care is usually the policy, and the dignity of risk sits inside that. So there's clients' rights and responsibility, risks and duty of care, and workers carried out by a professional, usually gathering relevant information from fellow workers, and then policies and procedures, codes of ethics, codes of practice, good governance charters for committees as well. So everybody has their own policies and procedures, but all must reflect and align with whatever the legislation, state, territory and Commonwealth. So for an example, when we do our intake and assessment, the law that sits around that is the 1988 Privacy and Confidentiality Act, so the Privacy Act of 1988, and then there's amendments to those acts. So you need to make sure that you're current with that in your state or territory just by reviewing it. Like I said, you don't need to know it off by heart, but you do need to know where to go to just check if you're on the right track. Or you can ask somebody. You can go to a relevant agency. Usually it's an authority. So that's the scope within privacy, confidentiality and disclosure. That could be us disclosing, or what do we do when a client discloses information to us that we need to report? Child protection are there to act on the best interest of the child. You can review their policies and procedures and the child protection legislation. So principles of empowerment is about self-advocacy and agency over self, meaning empowerment is not a word that a lot of sector workers will work with when we're working with First Nation, because First Nation people will come back to us and often say, please don't use the word empowerment, or I want to empower you. It implies that you have the power to give to me, as if I did not have that already. So words need to be safe when we are working with different cultures. And culture is not always country of origin. It is meeting the needs of the clients that we work with and not applying our interpretation over that. That's what inclusivity, diversity and equity is about. So you'll see DEI written, diversity, equity and inclusivity. Make sure that frames, they're your values, they're your policies, they're your principles around agency. So look, it's written there and you're going to see it written, and you'll write it, I write it, but it's something that I try and be a little more mindful, and I'll hold back and say, this is about your rights and you being able to make those choices and decisions. I'll just be more thoughtful about if I'm going to use words, but we need to take our cues from our clients as well. So it might be an individual or it might be a group think around how that collective group expect people to be treating them and others. And then what are the systems around that, making sure that people's rights are respected? There's one there for young people, video to watch in your own time. And then, of course, there's another one for Maria in your learner's guide, and you will do that in your own time as well. So these ones are self-paced, but they're there in your slides. And then, of course, they refer to what is already in your learner's guide. And if you go to class, then you unpack some of those. Then our final part of our CHCADV001 in our key learnings that I'm going through with you. At the end of that session and the week that you're working with, if you go to classes, then you will look at how to get hold of the information about what applies in your state or territory and also your work, how we find other community resources as an advocate for our client, how do we put referrals in place, making sure that we're very clear who we refer to, how much information we share, our client will tell us. It is for the client to tell their own story, not for us to give all of that information. We don't need all of the information to do our role, and neither do other providers. So if we're referring over, we need to reach an agreement and us have an understanding around what our client wants us to share in that. So we don't have that power, and we definitely do not have that consent. We don't have consent to even discuss our client with our peers unless we're doing case conferencing. So in some organisations, that is very closely guarded, where we will never refer about a client's name unless we're doing shared casework, and the client will either be there or a member of their family or another advocate will be there, or a support worker, and represent that person. So we need to make sure that we have good strategies around supporting and representing clients, and then communicating that professionally. Self-advocacy. So there's a document there on helping the client determine what's their ability to even be able to advocate on their own behalf. So, and that's where you would step in. So for this unit, there is role plays or skills around it where you're representing a client and you're not quite sure about the capacity because they're experiencing dementia. And so we do an assessment around that, and we ask them some questions. If it's literacy and numeracy, we'll ask the questions and complete that for them. If they have capacity to be able to answer those questions themselves, you can sit beside them and explain that. You don't help them with the answers because their capacity to be able to advocate on their own behalf is based on a self-assessment, self-advocacy tool, which is part of this unit. Then, of course, what are the risks around being an advocate? And there's definitely risks, and then the benefits of that as well. So we need to make sure that we only represent what our client says, but there are laws and you can be held responsible if you work outside the scope of what an advocate can do. Everything must be done with the client's consent, and you act on behalf of the first party, but not as a worker, not as a support worker. An advocate is a completely different relationship, and it has very strict guidelines around what you can and cannot do and how you must document that as well. So this unit is purely to be able to give you the confidence that you've got a good understanding around when would I be the advocate and when might I be the support worker, and those two things are different. So we would review any of the actions and the feedback, and we would have a consultation with those key people in our client's life. And it may be that we're talking to a GP, a speech therapist, a home care nurse, another organisation, legal aid, an NDIS provider. So all of these things that we will be given the responsibility to advocate on behalf of our client for them. It can be for something quite serious or actually something quite simple. So advocacy isn't always problem solving. It's about assisting and being the voice for the client to improve the quality of their life or to ensure that they have the same rights as others. So where do you find the information? Sorry, I'll just put myself there. Yeah. So networks and contacts, stakeholder engagement. Wow, absolutely primary. So you get that from management, employers, community groups, family, friends, other support organisations, and even your peers in the workplace. But to be guided, if you're not sure, then your policies and procedures which come from management. So, sorry, health service providers, banks, financial institutions, schools, government departments, legal representatives, police. So oftentimes, like most of my role in advocacy is child safety, government departments, local MPs or federal MPs, legal aid, police, GPs. Sometimes I may be in the wait room as a support person, or I may be actually sitting there and sharing some of that information. But I've agreed with the client exactly what it is that they want me to say and what they do not want me to say. And that's where that ethical and the duty of care will come in for you. So you can't hold or withhold that information. You have a duty of care to make sure the best interests of the clients are represented, but that is not opinion-based. That is within the guidelines of an advocate. So if you were in live class, we'd be discussing resources in a workplace. I would guide you over to your policies and procedures, your mission statement, your code of conduct, and your charter as well. So depending on the organisation, most websites have where they stand on that. So I think it's worth investigating that. You may already be a sector worker and you can look at your own. I love policy and procedure because I like to stay inside the guidelines, and there's a sense of confidence that you can get of doing the right thing if you work into a guideline. If it moves around, it can be a bit obscure, and I like to know exactly what's okay and what's not okay, or where's my stop and go. And you usually have a guideline, and the guideline will be inside your policy and procedure. And then if your organisation hasn't got the full depth, then you can have a look at the Office of Public Advocate or Guardian, legal services, consumer rights, and Centrelink. Centrelink has human services. So social workers in Centrelink are under a different department, and Centrelink is under its own Department of Social Services, DSS, often referred to now Centrelink as Services Australia. But, you know, some of those Centrelink buildings, we still call it Centrelink, but it's actually under Services Australia now. If they rebrand themselves, if you've been around long enough, you'll know it was CES, Commonwealth Employment Services. Then they branched out to do other things. So Medicare sit inside there, human services sit inside there, and then of course Services Australia sit inside there, which is around payments and things like that. Human Rights Commission, their website's amazing. And they're very helpful. Legislation, regulation, standards of guidelines. In Fair Work Australia, if you're looking around psychological safety, Fair Work Australia or workplace health and safety, is now has included psychological safety, which is around mental health, but their work will tell you if someone has met that threshold around bullying or harassment or discrimination, and that's something that you can go in. You don't have to give your details, but you can go in and do the interactive and weigh that up. Is that or isn't it? And it's good to actually just put that in there as well. Some people will go and have, like, maybe their advocate could be a union if we are talking about a workplace matter as well. So policy and procedure documents which need to be reviewed and updated, and that's part of the accreditation for people to be in receipt of public funding. You can go higher if you're not satisfied, the Ombudsman, and they are an unbiased, and they will make a decision as an independent body or be official. Investigate complaints about government agencies. They will seek to help you find a resolution which is a satisfactory outcome. And then there's parliamentary jurisdictions around Ombudsman, and then specific industry ombudsman. So there's some for communication, there's some for that we have a mental health commissioner. So yeah, you just need to investigate this now a little bit further as well. So watch the video and recordings around that. It's embedded into your slides. You do that in your own time. And then, of course, you'll go through your role play, and the scenario around that is what are those reasonable adjustments in that video? What do you need around local council or local government? And then the scenario and the outcomes of the roles of the support worker. What is the role in that scenario of the university student and a university representative to advocate for that client, which is the university student. So where do you locate your resources? So online searches, make sure it's credible. So it is a government department, or it's got weight, or it's recognised. Industry and sector networks and contacts, so peak bodies or memberships that you sit in. Colleagues within your own organisation. You may have a HR officer or a safety officer. Make sure that you know who are those line of command. So who's your line manager? What's the protocol? Do we report? How do we report? What is reportable? And then local service directories. So it's good to have a portfolio when you're studying and start building. Well, what is in my local area? When I study advocacy, I need to start building my own resource folder as well. So by the time you start your qualification, your certificate or your diploma, you will have amazing resources. So you open up one folder for your studies, and then every time you do a unit, you open up a subfolder and you put in your recordings and you put in your learner's guide, download that, any of the extra things, save those documents. They're an incredible wealth of resources, and your learner's guide, they're all yours to keep, and they're amazing. The content is excellent. So keep in mind that things get updated all the time, but it gives you your foundation, and you'll find that you'll draw back on that. There's some others that we draw on as well. So there's some different guidelines and books that we would refer to, things like mental health first aid or suicide intervention. There's usually evidence-based data around that when we're working in that framework. Domestic family violence as well. So just look up your local service directories, know what your 24/7 numbers are, how your client is going to be able to be supported. That's part of your role when you're not available, because you're not available 24/7. That would be an unhealthy professional boundary, but there are organisations that can provide that. Just thinking of one would be Lifeline, 13 11 14, or domestic family violence, 1-800 RESPECT. Both of those are really helpful. 13 Yarn is the Lifeline branch around First Nation, making sure that that's a respectful place. So you do some of your own online research around your local community resources relevant to the client's case study. We give you some, but you should really be jumping into this space and embracing it. Advocacy is a great opportunity to be able to find out who is out there to help clients. Your role could be just overseeing who is supporting the client, those wraparound supports for holistic care. You do not have to be everything to everyone. You'll burn out. And it also is a codependent relationship that you're establishing with your client if they think you and only you can work with them. So we don't quickly refer people over, but we make it seamless so that if it's a good referral, we check in with the client and say, like, how are you finding? And they go, you know what, I don't click with them. So it's not a good fit. So our duty of care is to help them find something that is making them feel that their life is improving or that they've got greater access. So they're your protocols around making a referral. And the final one, the following up, making sure that it is a good fit, and that you even have consent to be able to discuss that. We do not have to have every bit of information. It is entirely up to the client to decide what they share with others that we refer them to. But consent is what we must have. It is a referral is not just a complete saying anything you want about that client. We do not have to tell their story. It is for the client to tell their story. The only thing that you can share is what you and the client agree on. So yeah, like create your own research around it, referrals. It's a good idea to maybe go into a couple of places or go online and see what their referral process is how do we get in touch with you. Some people have an online referral, you can self-refer, or the referral might have to come from another agency. So some of the strategies around there, surprisingly, media, social media, doing questionnaires, surveys, getting feedback, might be in a court, a hearing or a tribunal, lobbying to your local MP, here's an unmet need in our community. It could be that something that you've identified and the client may belong to another agency, but you do occasionally provide services to them. And it might be something that you want to be able to just speak up and say, can I catch up with you about this client? We're sharing some care and supports and they access our services. Don't go into depth around that, but just it's more around a query. Could you tell me a little bit more about your service? And then you take that back to your client. And if there's something there that needs representation, you'll do that. You may organise a meeting and that may end up being negotiating. All of this is part of your role as an advocate. That's everything that an advocate would do for a client. So negotiation and mediation as part of advocacy, it can be, you can have, you can definitely have that dignity of risk and you can have differing opinions, but you just need to let the person know which bits you can do and which bits you cannot. So that comes with trust and engagement and mutual respect as well. So just be really mindful about that when we negotiate. It's reaching decisions on behalf of our client. Mediation is very neutral. You're the independent person in helping those two parties reach their own solution that suits them. And then conciliation is use a third party, an independent person, to come in and help the parties reach a solution they're unable to reach on their own behalf. Okay. And you'll have a recording to watch there and reflect upon. Of course, if you aren't in live classes, you won't have the discussion, but you definitely will have that reflection time. So reflect on what are some of the barriers to self-advocacy. So that means what could be a speed bump. They can get over it, but they need a bit more support from you. Or could they maybe have a barrier that they can't get through if they were self-advocating, and they may need to bring somebody like yourself in who's going to be their advocate or their support worker. So some barriers can be, I've tried and it hasn't gone well for me in the past. It can be, I'm triggered by that because I have trauma. Lack of understanding of rights, that you actually do have the right to be able to do that, and feeling that it's a hopeless situation, which increases the stress and duress that our clients are under. But if we think of an example around history of past failure, it might be a victim survivor speaking to the police and the police not assisting or supporting. That unfortunately far too much of that happens, and yet there's some incredible people who work in those services in all of those agencies, but it could be for our client that did not go well last time, and so it'll be a barrier for them to be able to move forward without getting someone to support them, and that's where an advocate can come in. The past trauma can simply be that if we ask a client to talk about what happened to them, we could be re-injuring them. It is a psychological injury. Getting them to talk about themselves needs to be wherever the client is up to, and we need to have trauma-informed practices when we approach topics that are stressful or have been traumatic for them. So some of the risks and benefits. And your follow-up actions. Skills you need, if there's any costs involved. A lot of advocacy services, there is no fee, but in some they do charge. Where information is needed, it's got to be sent to places, so you need to make sure you've got your consent there, and where you can find that information to be able to bring that back to the client. So even under something like perhaps like freedom of information, there's a fee attached to getting things like that. If you want to know what a coronial report was, then you may be next of kin, but they didn't have you listed there. So you might be advocating for someone to be able to get some documents that aren't necessarily public documents, but you may be able to get authority to have access to that. So when you're working for an organisation, you don't work independently. They ask you to work autonomously if you're working on your own. Independently means you're working outside of the organisation's guidelines. Working autonomously means that you can work inside the guidelines, but at all times you report up to the legal entity, which is your organisation, and the legal entity are the ones who have the funding if they're being funded by government grants. And of course, it's without those government grants, there's no work for us in the sector as well. So we work where the demand is, and that's where government will put funding in behind any of those needs. So if you're unsure, make sure you ask your organisation and that you keep your client updated. Of course, we're respectful. It's our professional conduct and always upholding the rights of the client in that space. There's some more scenarios to run through around reflection, and that wraps up our key learnings around CHCADV001. But I would like to just walk you through the assessment task, and I'll take you over into the porthole for this one. Okay, so just returning now, I'm in the porthole. You can see here that we have the unit code. So if you've got questions around any of your assessments, just go to your learner support officers, and you've got all of that information, how to contact them. And just ask them to assist you if you are stuck accessing any of your resources as well. They are the ones who oversee your portal for you and release units as you're progressing, because you can work at your own pace. So with this one, CHCADV001, and it says T1, so it is task 1 of 4, which means there's 4 tasks attached to this. As well. So, and with task 1, there are 18 questions. Let's just have a look at some of those. So I'll just give you a quick overview with this task 1. Some of them are multiple choice questions, automatically marked as well. And we will give you feedback. So you get 3 attempts, but we can open up more attempts for you. The reason why we kind of stop at 3 is that each time we give you feedback, we want that to just help you get a better understanding. If the feedback isn't clear, if it isn't guiding you, you can go to learner support officers to help better understand that, or they will ask a trainer as well. Unfortunately, when you're in classes, a trainer doesn't do that because not everyone in a class is looking for that. So you can book a one-on-one with a trainer. You get 1 hour every month, and you book that through the booking system. Rather than with your trainer. They won't do those appointments directly for you. But your learner support officers, 90% of the time, can answer any question that you wanted to ask a trainer anyway. So they have full access to your porthole. They can see what assessments, they can see what it is that you submitted, help you interpret the feedback a little better, and they have your learner's guide in front of them as well. So you've got an amazing team around you with HADA. Class is only one part of that, and of course not everyone can come to classes. So doing this full unit in a pre-recording, going through the slides, they're your key learning, but you will need to go into your learner's guide, you will need to do your own research and do your own reading. If you're doing a certificate 4, then you definitely have 10 to 12 hours of study that you must do every week. If you're doing a diploma, you have 15 to 20 hours of study to complete that qualification. So class and asking some questions is not enough to get you through your certificate or your diploma. There's still a lot of work that you've got to do. And depending on how you study, I like to get all of my resources and just do a bit of an overview. I go through the learner's guide, and then I go over and I have a look at the questions and I open them. I don't submit. But if you are submitting your work, at the bottom here, you can say begin, and you can start to answer some questions, and it'll take you to the next one. Just make sure that you hit save so your work is saving, but you don't have to submit until you've fully completed. If you accidentally submit, not a problem. It'll get marked. It'll go in the wait list to get marked by a whole team of assessors that we all work. Whoever is qualified can mark your assessment. So if you just go on a wait list, and whoever is at the top, we work our way through. We aim for a return between 48 and 72 hours because we often have weekends, and there's no staff assessing during the weekends as well. And of course, your trainers and assessors, they are all sector workers. They work through the day, and then we have at night. But we do have other assessors, and they work on that. But there's a large learner community, and I love it when there's assessments there. It means that learners are progressing, but I also know that you're really keen to get that feedback. So we'll give you feedback, and we'll give you more attempts if that's what you need. And if it's the third attempt and it's still not there, I kind of like to make a phone call, or I'll send an email and say, I can see you're stuck with this. Here's some guidance around that. It might be another way, just another person explain it, but your learner support officers can assist you. And if they can't, they will then come back to a trainer for you. So yeah, if you get something wrong, we'll give you feedback and you can try again. And you can have as many attempts as you want. There's absolutely no penalty whatsoever. But we are a 100% rating, which means that you must pass everything to be satisfactory. Let's have a look at just one. So what best describes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And here it's going to ask you to select one. So it says in there, select one of the following. The answers in your learner guide. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Is this true or false? Is legally binding? You've done your study, you'll be able to answer that question. You've got e-learnings, you can have a practice run if you like, but your assessments are where it counts. The e-learnings are just to get familiar, but the assessments are the ones that count. Quite a lot of multiple choice here, and then provide an example of how Universal Declaration of Human Rights guides ethical practice. The answers are in your learner's guide. I like to download the learner's guide. I also study, but I like to download my learner's guide. And then once I've saved it into my documents folder for the unit, every unit has its own learner's guide. I'll just open it up, and I might copy and paste that question, and I'll put it in the search bar, and it'll find exactly where it is in my learner's guide. So that you might find that a helpful tip as well. It can save a lot of time. But your learner's guide is based also around task 1, 2, 3, and 4. To help you. So all up, there are 18 questions. Some will automatically be marked, and you might end up getting 17 out of 18 correct, and this might be number 12, might be the one that you get stuck on. So it says select 3 indicators that might suggest a child suffering from abuse or neglect. And it gives you some options out of there. You must select 3. More could be true. And more than one thing can be true, but for the point of the assessment, you'll be required to be answering it the way that they're looking to have that answered. Let me take you here. And you can see here that we have task 1. And then you have task 2 is a role play. The observation checklist is where we mark that. And then task 3 out of 4 is a role play. And then we do our assessor observation. This one is done in front of an assessor. So of course, the assessor's observing and they're marking you as well. They don't play the client. If it says it's assessor-led, that means the assessor is there and they're assessing you in real time. I'll give you evidence to support that. And then 4 is another role play. So this is very skills orientated, but we give you scenarios where you're going to be that person. Let me just, let's have a look at the task 2, just to be able to guide you on what one role play might look like. They all have instructions, so I want to take you to the overview. with the instructions for this one, and then I'll take you through how do we mark that? What would it need to look like if you had passed that role play and the skills? Please go over to your Discord though, where all of the resources are for role plays. If you are doing them, there's extra support in there. Make sure that you go in and look at the resources, some great do's and don'ts, and even some role plays done for you as well. So in this assessment task, you will determine work with the client who is unhappy with the service being offered and find ways to meet the client's needs, interests, and rights. We spoke about that through our slides. The first part of it consists of two parts, part A and then part B. Part A is you must speak with the client to work out what the issue is, what is it that's happening for them, and how their needs are not being met. And then through that discussion, you'll inform them of their rights and their responsibilities while helping to redesign what their support plan looks like to suit their needs. We give you that information. Part B is you will assess the service to be provided to provide risks, any potential risks, and plan how to deal with those risks with the client. So it's a preventative space as well. And then you'll move into part B, which is how are you going to, apply that. Here it says resources. So you're going to need an email template. That link will take you there. And a risk assessment and management plan template. That's where you're going to put all of that in there. For this one, it gives you, for the task, John was elected to try MenShed, which is a program for men to connect with each other, reduce isolation, but do some work with tools and things. A lot of people like that, and they find that there's a lot of connection with community, doing crafts and activities. They may no longer have all the tools that they used to have, or and they can go to the men's shed and be able to access all of those. So you need to complete a risk assessment that covers any potential risk for the client accessing that, and yourself as the support worker, and any others who you think might be part of the wraparound support who are a part of that activity, if there's any risk to them or to John. And then follow up on his request with service that provides for John's preferred activity, because you're going to be the support worker accessing those supports externally as well. So they're your tasks. Step one is that you will do the risk assessment and management plan, and you'll fill that in on that template. Then you will send the email to the men's shed, and gives you the address for the men's shed there. You already have John's name, it's in the scenario. You'll have completed the risk assessment, and you'll have completed the email. And if you need to, you can add some extra information in there that you want to, things that you've explored. So let me just take you back to how does the assessor mark that? Sorry. That was task 2. So let me show you what we do behind the scenes in an observation checklist for your skills, which is what a role play is. So you'll see up here, it says T2B. B means it's an observation checklist, and that's for the assessors. So how do we mark you? We mark you like this. So with this assessment, it says during the role play, I observed the candidate or learner, that's you, demonstrate the following. They discuss the rights and the responsibilities of John. Now, it's in the instruction, and you will apply that, and that means we can mark one off. Yes, the learner did do that. 2, during the role play, I observed the learner discuss the rights and responsibility of the service, what we can do. and what we cannot do. This is what our service does. And 3, identify when John's rights were not being met. So you'll have done that in your intake and your risk assessment there. You put it in the plan, and you may also put that into an email, but you're definitely putting it into his file notes. 4, I observed the learner assist John in finding their own interests, discuss their rights and their needs, their choices and responsibility. During the role play, I observed the learner provide John with options for meeting his rights and his needs, and allowed John to identify his preferred options. And the only way to be able to get that is to ask John in your role play. The best way to ask a question of a client, to get them to be part of the decision making and that process where we can say we've collaborated, is to not come up with anything that's an advice or solution. Don't fix anything, tame that advice monster. So ask open-ended question. John, what were some of the hobbies that you used to have? And John's going to talk about how he used to love making things, and the person who plays John has to authentically be in that space and recreate what that would be like. So while it's good to have family and friends do that for you, they have to get inside that character, and it's not about just agreeable. John could be very hesitant and reluctant because it hasn't gone well for him in the past. So we need to watch you do all of those, not just a nice, easy, well, that's lovely and that's great, and then in and out. We haven't really gone there. We need to explore and make sure that we're making a suitable referral and taking all of those preventative measures. Ask open-ended questions. They're all your who, your what, your how, your when, your where, and your why. They're your open-ended questions. Let's have a look at the last one. It says, I observed the learner support and encourage John to use their rights and personal preferences in a safe environment. So you'll do that at the end, this summary. Well, John, this is amazing, and I'm really keen to hear how you enjoy the Men's Shed program, and you'll be able to have your own voice there and your own preferences in a safe environment. The scenario will unpack for that why you need to approach this as a support worker thinking about John's rights. And the instructions are there in the role play instructions when you go into this unit, and it says click on this link, and it breaks down how the person that's going to be John plays that for you. So that's task 2. Then, of course, task 3 is role play, and task 4 also is role play. And there's supporting documents that you need to fill in for each of your role plays as well. So if you're a sector worker, this may come to you a little bit easier than others, but know now that I've shown you, you're only being assessed on those things. Not all the things you know about a Men's Shed. These are about, are you making sure that you're collaborating? Are you looking after the privacy and confidentiality? Are you checking in with John in that scenario about, is he comfortable with that? John, would that be something that you would like to be able to move forward with? What might that look like for you if that was going well? What might that look like for you if it wasn't? What is it that you'd be concerned about? That's what we're looking for, is your ability to be able to communicate with John and make sure that you've captured that information to support them to access greater supports and improve their quality of life. So advocacy is a role that I do, and I do it in the court system, and I love it. Is it easy? No. And is it an easy part of my personality? No. I have to learn how to make sure that I'm really vigilant in that space You can be really passionate about supporting somebody, but an advocate has to work inside very strict guidelines. You don't have to be an advocate, but what you do want to know is what would be required of an advocate, because there's people you can refer your clients out to. But if that area interests you, then this is a unit that you'll really enjoy. Combine this with a JP qualification or something like that, where you are an officer of the court, you get sworn in by the magistrate when you complete that. But you don't need to be a JP to be able to advocate on someone's behalf in an informal way, as long as you've got your client's consent and they have filled in the advocacy form for you to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this unit. We often are doing this work for our most vulnerable members of the community as well. So I want to say thank you, Vicky Hannah, and I'm your trainer for this particular recording. And of course, your live classes, you will have your trainer as well, depending on the unit and the qualification that you're doing. This is a unit that all of the qualifications do, because it impacts all of the clients in the wider community. So thank you for your time. Reach out to learner support officers and enjoy your studies, and know that we're here to support you.